The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates, a meticulously planned suburban community where every mailbox stood at regulation height and every lawn maintained the HOA-approved shade of emerald green. It was the kind of neighborhood where property values mattered more than personalities, and where the Homeowners Association wielded power like a medieval fiefdom. At the center of this bureaucratic web sat Margaret Thornfield, better known to residents as HOA Karen, though none dared say it to her face. Margaret had been the HOA president for 7 consecutive years, a reign that began with promises of maintaining community standards, but had devolved into something resembling a suburban surveillance state. Her silver Toyota Camry had become as familiar as the mail truck, prowling the streets at all hours, hunting for violations with the dedication of a bloodhound. A garden gnome 2 inches too tall, a car parked 3 degrees off-center in a driveway, holiday decorations left up one day past the regulated removal date. Nothing escaped her eagle eyes and measuring tape. On this particular Tuesday morning, in late October, Margaret clutched her clipboard with religious fervor as she made her rounds. The autumn air was crisp, perfect for her weekly compliance patrol, as she liked to call it. Her sensible walking shoes clicked against the sidewalk, in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of dread for many residents. She wore her authority like armor, a navy blazer despite the mild weather, reading glasses hanging from a gold chain, and an expression that suggested she'd been personally wronged by every minor infraction she encountered. 3 blocks away, David Chen was completely oblivious to the approaching storm. A 34-year-old software engineer who worked remotely, David had moved to Willowbrook Estates 8 months ago, drawn by the quiet streets and the promise of a peaceful work environment. His modest 2-story colonial sat on Maple Drive, distinguished from its neighbors only by the slightly more colorful flower garden his wife Sarah had planted along the front walkway, a small act of rebellion that had already earned them 2 warning letters from the HOA. David's garage had been converted into his home office, a decision that seemed practical given the limited space in their house and his need for a quiet workspace. The garage door remained functional, though he rarely used it, preferring to enter through the side door that connected to their kitchen. Inside, he'd created a surprisingly sophisticated setup. A standing desk positioned near the large window, multiple monitors displaying lines of code, and professional lighting for the frequent video conferences that were part of his job as a senior developer for a tech startup. What Margaret didn't know, what none of the neighbors knew, was that David had been dealing with a legal situation that had been brewing for months. His previous employer, Megacorp Industries, had been systematically underpaying their remote workers by misclassifying them as independent contractors while treating them as full employees. David had joined a class action lawsuit along with dozens of other affected workers, and today was the day of the virtual hearing that would determine whether their case would proceed to trial. The irony was delicious, though neither party was aware of it yet. While Margaret spent her days documenting minor infractions and threatening legal action over grass height and paint colors, David was about to participate in actual legal proceedings, involving genuine violations of labor law, violations that had cost him and his colleagues thousands of dollars in benefits and fair wages. At 9:45 a.m., David settled into his ergonomic chair and opened his laptop. The virtual courtroom was already populating with participants. The judge, lawyers for both sides, and nearly 40 plaintiffs scattered across different time zones. He adjusted his camera angle, ensuring that the backdrop showed only his professional setup and not the garage door behind him. The last thing he needed was to look unprofessional during such an important hearing. Judge Patricia Hendricks called the session to order at exactly 10 a.m. A veteran of the bench with 25 years of experience, she had adapted to virtual proceedings with remarkable efficiency during the pandemic and had continued to use them for certain types of hearings. Her virtual courtroom was as formal as any physical one, complete with digital nameplates, muted microphones, and strict protocols that she enforced with military precision. "Good morning, everyone," Judge Hendricks began, her voice carrying the authority that made even experienced attorneys straighten in their chairs. "We are here today to hear arguments in the matter of Chen versus Megacorp Industries, case number CV 2023-8847. This is a motion hearing to determine whether this class action lawsuit will proceed to trial. I want to remind all participants that this is a formal legal proceeding being recorded for the court record. Please ensure your microphones are muted unless you are called upon to speak. David felt his heart rate increase as the gravity of the situation settled over him. This wasn't just about his personal situation anymore. The outcome would affect dozens of workers who had been similarly exploited. The lead attorney for the plaintiffs, Jessica Martinez, had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and David knew that his testimony, should he be called upon, could be crucial in establishing the pattern of violations. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Margaret had reached the end of Elm Street and was turning onto Maple Drive, her clipboard now bearing fresh marks from her morning hunt. She'd already documented Mrs. Peterson's slightly overgrown hedge, the Thompson, family's garbage cans that had been left out 12 minutes past the regulation pickup time, and what appeared to be an unauthorized bird feeder in the Johnsons' backyard. Her mood was particularly sour this morning because the previous evening's HOA board meeting had been contentious, with several residents questioning her interpretation of the covenant rules regarding outdoor decorations. The resistance was growing, and Margaret could feel her carefully constructed authority beginning to show cracks. 3 families had filed formal complaints against her enforcement methods with the management company, and there were whispers of a petition to recall her from the presidency. The very thought made her jaw clench. She had dedicated years of her life to maintaining the standards that kept their property values high, and this was the thanks she got? As she approached David's house, her trained eye immediately spotted what she considered a glaring violation. The side door to his garage, the one that led to his kitchen, was propped open with a small wedge, presumably for ventilation. According to her interpretation of Section 4.7 of the HOA covenants, garage doors were to remain closed during daylight hours unless a vehicle was actively entering or exiting. The fact that this was technically a side door and not the main garage door was a distinction that Margaret's rigid mindset refused to acknowledge. She marched up the driveway with purpose, her pen already poised to write another citation. The sound of her heels on the concrete might have alerted David to her approach, but he was completely absorbed in the proceedings unfolding on his screen. Attorney Martinez was presenting the opening arguments, detailing how Megacorp had systematically violated labor laws by denying benefits to workers who were clearly employees, not independent contractors. Your Honor, Martinez was saying, the evidence will show that Megacorp exercised complete control over these workers' schedules, provided all necessary equipment, and required them to follow company protocols to the letter, yet they classified them as contractors to avoid paying health insurance, vacation time, and other legally mandated benefits. My client, Mr. Chen, worked exclusively for Megacorp for 2 years, following their schedule, using their systems, and reporting to their managers daily. There is no reasonable interpretation under which he could be considered an independent contractor. David nodded slightly, remembering the countless mornings he'd logged into Megacorp systems at exactly 8 a.m., the mandatory team meetings, the company-issued laptop that he'd been required to use for all work. The classification had always felt wrong, but he'd needed the job and had been told it was standard practice in the industry. Judge Hendricks was reviewing the preliminary documents when she noticed something unusual. Mr. Chen, she said, I want to ensure we have a clear record. Could you please state your full name and confirm your address? David unmuted his microphone. Yes, Your Honor. My name is David Michael Chen, and I reside at 847 Maple Drive, Willowbrook Estates. What happened next would become the stuff of suburban legend, a story told and retold at neighborhood barbecues and coffee shops for years to come. As David spoke into his microphone, Margaret Thornfield, armed with her clipboard, her measuring tape, and her unshakable conviction that she was the guardian of neighborhood standards, walked directly into his garage-turned office to confront him about the door violation. She had planned to knock first, of course. Margaret wasn't completely unreasonable, despite what her critics might say. But the side door was standing wide open, and she could see David sitting at his desk with his back to her. In her mind, this was simply a matter of getting his attention to discuss the violation. She had no way of knowing that she was about to step directly into a live federal court proceeding. Excuse me, Margaret announced loudly as she crossed the threshold into David's workspace, her voice carrying the imperious tone. What Margaret didn't know as she sat in her car, wrestling with the first seeds of self-doubt she'd experienced in years, was that her 5-minute appearance in federal court was about to change her life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The virtual hearing had been recorded, as all federal proceedings are, but more importantly, it had been witnessed by 43 people whose phones were very much not muted during the recess. By 11:30 a.m., a shaky cell phone video of Margaret's entrance, captured by plaintiff Jennifer Walsh, who had been recording her own screen to show her husband later, was making its rounds in a private Facebook group for remote workers. By noon, it had been shared to Twitter with the caption, "HOA Karen interrupts federal court hearing to complain about garage door." By 1 p.m., it had been picked up by a legal humor account with 50,000 followers. By 3 p.m., Margaret Thornfield had become the unwitting star of the internet's latest viral sensation. But the real twist was still coming. David, meanwhile, had managed to refocus on the hearing after Margaret's departure. Judge Hendricks had been remarkably gracious about the interruption, and Attorney Martinez had been brilliant in using the incident to strengthen their case. The defense attorney's cross-examination had been notably less aggressive than expected. It's hard to argue that someone isn't functioning as an employee when they've just been interrupted at their required workstation by their homeowners association. As the hearing wrapped up around 2 p.m., David felt cautiously optimistic. Judge Hendricks had indicated she would issue her ruling within the week, but the tone of her questions and the defense's apparent strategy shift suggested things might go their way. He was just closing his laptop when his phone started buzzing, with notifications. The first text was from his wife, Sarah. Honey? Why is there a video of you and Margaret Thornfield trending on TikTok? The second was from his neighbor, Tom. Dude, you're famous. That video of Margaret barging into your meeting is everywhere. The third was from his college roommate in California. Is this really you? My girlfriend just sent me this hilarious video of some HOA lady crashing a Zoom call. David's stomach dropped as he opened his social media accounts. There it was, his most embarrassing professional moment, viewed by hundreds of thousands of people in climbing. The comments ranged from sympathetic, this poor guy handling it like a champ, to gleeful, HOA Karen gets what she deserves, to analytical, actually this is brilliant evidence for his case. But as David scrolled through the responses, he began to notice something unexpected. Mixed in with the humor and mockery were dozens of comments from people sharing their own stories of HOA overreach, workplace misclassification, and the challenges of working from home during disputes with neighbors or associations. His embarrassing moment was resonating with people in ways he hadn't anticipated. One comment in particular caught his attention. This is exactly why I'm afraid to work from home. My HOA president is just as bad as this lady. Literally got a citation last week for having my ring light visible through my window during a client call. Another read, the fact that she can just walk into his workspace while he's in a legal meeting proves he's not really an independent contractor. How is that different from a boss walking into your office? David realized that his viral moment wasn't just entertainment, it was inadvertently highlighting real issues that millions of remote workers were facing. The intersection of workplace rights and homeowners association overreach had never been more visibly demonstrated. Meanwhile, Margaret's day was taking a decidedly different turn. She had returned home after her morning rounds, intending to type up her violation notices and send them out as usual. But when she sat down at her computer and opened Facebook, she was greeted by notification after notification. Tagged photos, shared videos, comments on posts she didn't remember making. The first video she saw was titled, HOA Karen Crashes Federal Court Hearing. Her heart sank as she watched herself march into David's garage, interrupt his legal proceeding, and then get tangled in his computer cables. The comments section was a nightmare of mockery, memes, and increasingly creative variations on the Karen theme. But what hurt more than the humiliation was reading the comments from her own neighbors. People she had thought she was serving, people whose property values she had worked tirelessly to protect, were sharing the video with captions like, finally someone caught Margaret on camera, and this is what we've been dealing with for 7 years. Mrs. Peterson, whose head she had cited that very morning, had shared the video with the comment, "This woman has made our neighborhood a place of fear instead of community. Maybe this will finally wake up the other board members to how out of control she's become." The Thompsons, the family with the garbage can violation, had posted, "We've been too scared to speak up, but watching this makes us realize we're not alone. Margaret Thornfield has turned our HOA into her personal fiefdom." Even longtime supporters were beginning to distance themselves. Board member Patricia Wu, who had backed Margaret for years, had posted a diplomatic but pointed comment. "While I appreciate Margaret's dedication to our community standards, this incident highlights the need for better communication and perhaps a review of our enforcement procedures." Margaret sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open before her, watching 7 years of carefully constructed authority crumble in real time. The comments kept coming, each one a fresh blow to her sense of purpose and identity. She had genuinely believed she was doing good work, protecting everyone's investments and maintaining the standards that made Willowbrook Estates a desirable place to live. But as she read story after story from her neighbors about feeling harassed, intimidated, and unwelcome in their own community, she began to see her actions through their eyes for the first time. The widow on Elm Street, who had received 3 citations for her slightly wilted flower bed while she was caring for her dying husband. The young family who had been fined for their children's toys being visible from the street after they'd been called inside for dinner. The elderly man who had been threatened with legal action for his slightly faded mailbox while he was recovering from surgery. Each story was a dagger to her heart because she remembered every single incident. She had written those citations, made those phone calls, issued those threats, and in every case she had felt righteous, justified, necessary. Now, seeing them compiled in a thread of neighborhood grievances triggered by her viral humiliation, she realized she had become exactly what she had always claimed to be fighting against, a force that diminished rather than enhanced their community. The phone rang, jolting her from her dark spiral of realization. The caller ID showed Willowbrook Management Company, the firm that managed their HOA's day-to-day operations. "Margaret, this is Janet from the management office," came the voice on the other end, professional but strained. "I think we need to talk about the situation that's developed today." "You saw the video," Margaret said quietly. "Margaret, everyone has seen the video. It's been shared to the company's main social media accounts by residents. I've got board members calling, homeowners calling, and frankly, some of our other HOA clients are asking questions about our management practices." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. While Janet was sympathetic to Margaret's years of service, the viral incident had created a public relations nightmare that extended beyond just Willowbrook Estates. The management company was recommending that Margaret step down from her position as president and that the board implement new policies for covenant enforcement. "I understand," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll submit my resignation to the board tonight." After hanging up, Margaret sat in the silence of her kitchen, surrounded by the fruits of her obsessive community management. Filing, cabinets full of violation notices, binders of covenant interpretations, charts tracking every citation she'd issued. It had been her life's work for 7 years, and it was ending not with recognition or gratitude, but with global humiliation and the realization that she had lost sight of what community actually meant. But Margaret Thornfield was not a woman to wallow in self-pity for long. As the afternoon wore on and she continued to read comments and stories from her neighbors, something began to shift inside her. The shame was still there, burning and real, but alongside it grew something else. A genuine desire to make amends. She began to compose a message, deleting and restarting multiple times before finally settling on something that felt honest. "To my neighbors in Willowbrook Estates. Today, I became an internet meme for all the wrong reasons, but maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. In my embarrassing interruption of David Chen's important legal hearing, I was forced to see myself through the eyes of a federal judge and dozens of other people. What they saw wasn't a dedicated community volunteer, it was someone who had lost sight of what it means to serve others. Reading your comments and stories today has been painful, but necessary. I realize that in my efforts to maintain our community standards, I have created an atmosphere of fear and resentment instead of neighborly cooperation. That was never my intention, but intentions don't matter when the impact has been so harmful. I am resigning as HOA president effective